Emily Martin, Chief Commercial Officer of GE-Hitachi. Thank you so much for having me down in Wilmington.
We are so glad you're here.
And speaking of Wilmington, this is your hometown. This is where you grew up. Tell me about that.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Who gets to work for a giant company like GE and get to live in their hometown, which also happens to be a beach town? Really lucky. I think I actually started my career here. So I grew up in Wilmington.
Were your folks involved in GE? Is that how you?
No. My parents actually. My dad is a Georgia Tech engineer, and he graduated and took a job with. Now it's Duke Energy. Back then it was Carolina Power and Light, and he was a startup engineer for the Brunswick nuclear plant, which is about 45 minutes south of Wilmington.
Still in the nuclear business.
Still
all right.
It's
all tied
together,
together.
but not GE. But it is interesting, kind of being in the industry. So I grew up here in Wilmington. I started here as a co-op.
What's a co-op?
So a co-op it's a little different than an intern. Mm-hmm. It's an intern-like position, cooperative education. So I was getting a chemical engineering degree from NC State. And so the summer after my freshman year, I worked here. Then I went back to school for one semester. Then I came here and worked for a semester. And so I continued alternating school a semester, work a semester, throughout my degree program. So, nuclear paid for my college too.
I mean, so that's pretty amazing, actually, the fact that you can go to school and then be getting real life work experience. I assume, like some internships, they don't really teach you much, but this is it's almost like they're investing in you a little bit. It's more long term, and you get to bring those learnings back to your education. How cool is that?
Right. It was really amazing. The financial piece was amazing for me as a student that was self-funding my education. Getting to graduate with a chemical engineering degree with no debt.
Yeah.
No debt, and parents that didn't have means to really help a whole lot. So GE nuclear, the co-op program, and you do the richness of the experience. When I was a co-op, I think you all got to tour our dry conversion process in the fuel manufacturing. So I was part of the startup team for that dry conversion process.
What does that mean? How can you be a startup I thought plant startup. Factory line startup also?
Factory line startup too. Okay. So, when a factory line starts up, you get to design the systems, you get to install the systems, you have to do functional tests, you get to kind of crawl all over the equipment that once it's kind of running and going, you don't get to, climb in and look at stuff and touch stuff once things are running, quite like you do during startup or construction.
Do the startup engineers have a particular value to an organization well into the life of the operation of a line? Because if there is a technical problem that pops up, they have an intimate knowledge of what those insides look like?
Yes. Yeah, I would say absolutely. And it's empirical evidence. I don't have any data to support this that's like studies or peer reviewed.
Just a podcast.
Right, just a podcast. But yeah, I think the team that was part of the plant, manufacturing plant startup here, even though they moved on to other jobs, often people would get a call, hey, what about this? What about that? And so I would assume, at a nuclear plant startup, it would be the same. There's a certain intimacy with the operations, with the parts that you get, I think, from being part of the original put it together, that once everything's buttoned up and you can't see in the same way, it's hard to get that same intimacy.
Yeah. So I introduced you as Chief Commercial Officer, but you're starting off your career as a chemical engineer. There's got to be a journey here to go from engineering through to the commercial side.
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a journeyman. Like, part of me thinks that I'm not quite old enough to really be a journeyman, and then I check my birth certificate, and I am old enough for that title. But so I started as a chemical engineer, but I actually began, co-opted here, so did the alternating with nuclear, but took my first GE job out of college. Loved GE. I did fall in love with GE during this program, but took my first job in healthcare. So I worked for GE Healthcare. Didn't like it. I missed the energy industry. I missed the technology of that. So came back. So 2 years.
Okay, cool.
2 years, came back. And then worked here kind of progressively, different roles, opportunities, but all in supply chain. So I actually started as a quality engineer for welding fuel spacers.
Okay.
And then we We moved the production facility from here to our sister plant in Kurihama, Japan. So I got to go live in Japan as we transferred that product line.
Because you
so
guys
that was
have
really neat.
You guys have a plant here. There's a plant in Japan, and then a plant in Spain. Is that right?
Mhm.
Those are your main
Kind of manufacturing
manufacturing
Yep.
facilities where
Yep.
things really come together.
Yep.
And you say, in supply chain your whole career, but there's many faces to supply chain. I mean, when you
Yeah.
started off as a quality engineer, you're there actually looking at the parts, but you're not thinking systems. Hey, how does the supply chain all come together?
No,
Right?
at that point in my career, no.
Yeah.
But as I moved into other aspects, so I was a quality engineer, then I moved into sourcing or procurement.
Okay, so all of a
then
sudden,
I moved into logistics and uranium management.
But I want to hear
so-
about that first switch when you went
Okay.
from on the technical side to then thinking supply. Where things actually coming from sourcing.
Mhm.
It's still applying analytical processes, but that's a different game.
It is a different game. I think it really has as much as anything else. There's a lot of luck to job moves, especially when, I've been in GE 21, 22 years. You move a lot of jobs and you do different things, and it's a combination of what you're interested in and timing and luck and coincidence. So things just sort of unfold, and a lot of my job moves, especially early in my career, were mostly that. I would connect with someone, in a leadership position, and that person would get promoted or move jobs. Then they'd bring me. So that's probably the common thread in almost every single one of my job moves.
Has mentorship played a big role in your career?
Huge.
Tell me about that.
Huge. So, very early on, even as a co-op student, I was encouraged by human resources, by the people I worked with, get a mentor, talk to someone about our company. And at that time, I think it was a little bit more of a sales pitch kind of thing, like get someone to tell you more about why GE is so great.
Yeah.
But then I did that, and people did tell me why GE was so great and kind of walked me through possibilities for career paths. And I, even as a chemical engineer, I was a chemical engineer with an environmental minor, and I wanted to do business stuff. Now at 22, did I really have a clue what business stuff meant? No. So I had a chemical engineering degree, a heart to do business stuff. And interestingly, I think that's maybe part of what led me into the sourcing, because that felt like business stuff, right? But it was mentoring too, because I had a mentor who had moved into that kind of aspect of the business and said, you'd be really good at this. You've got the technical part, but you also are a good communicator. You're also really good interpersonally. You could negotiate. And that actually was maybe the biggest scary step. One big scary step, in my life career evolution was that going from the safety of technical to, okay, take your technical knowledge and apply it across the table in a business setting, leverage it in a way that lets us get cost-effective solutions from suppliers. So it was a shift out of my comfort zone, but a good one.
When did you realize you were good at it, though? When did you realize that you could take on a totally new skill set and master it?
I'm not sure if I've really ever gotten there. In fairness, I'm always questioning. I'm not sure I ever feel like I have mastery of anything. I am a continuous learner. I am a learner.
Yeah.
And so I feel most inspired when I am just slightly uncomfortable.
Okay.
So I think that's just a truism of my personality. I think there's probably lots of us out there like that.
Yeah.
So if I'm just a bit uncomfortable, I feel most inspired. And if I start approaching mastery, I feel less inspired. So I think that maybe is why that's kept me kind of always pushing the envelope of something that's a little different or a little more or a little.
Wow. And then so that got you. That was your first jump. Then was from the QA side.
Yeah, into
to sourcing, and then sourcing to.
So from sourcing to lean manufacturing. So
what is lean manufacturing?
So lean manufacturing, it is a description, effectively, of the Toyota production system of manufacturing. And GE has launched lean a couple of times, if you will, in the last 20 years. And I would say right now with our new CEO, we're beginning a very different launch of it again. And I think maybe a more authentic way. But we tried. We started, gosh, I don't know exactly how many years ago, but we brought in consultants from Toyota Production System. We did these events, and so I was kind of the leader of the program to implement that. So I did training, I facilitated these workouts and these events, and we talked about mentorship. We had a super senior level woman, quality, I don't know, senior vice president of quality for energy or something, and she was doing a tour, and I was on the tour route to present some of the interesting things we had done with Lean. And she and I just really connected. She loved the content, but it was more than that. We had a really interesting chemistry. And I followed up afterwards and asked if she would be my mentor. And she said, why, yes, I would love to, Emily. And so she became a mentor. And with that, when GE acquired Enron's wind business, she was the supply chain leader with responsibility for developing the wind supply chain. And she gave me a pull, a tug, and said, hey, have I got the job for you?
Yeah.
And so I moved, I left nuclear then and went to work in wind and did supply chain development. And supply chain development, what I mean by that is working with existing companies to create a deal structure that would incent them to expand and build new factories for us to support wind blade production primarily.
And what are some of the mechanisms that you can use to do that? Because they're going to be taking a risk. If they're investing in capital infrastructure to bring prices down, which is ultimately going to benefit you, how do you help them with the risk share? Is it by giving them some financial capital? Is it by giving them long-term contract? What do you do?
Yes.
Okay.
We did a lot of things. We set up a variety of different contracts in different countries, because one thing that was interesting about the wind business at that time was all the wind developers, all the countries that wanted wind wanted local content in their countries. So we had to create it was both a low cost play, but also put the content where you needed it to win the order. And you needed to optimize the logistics because moving blades and towers are so expensive. So
how do you balance between those things? The concept of manufacturing, in scales of quantity, balanced versus local production, and then all of the headache of does this country even know how to do carbon fiber layup? They even have a skill set for welding.
Right, and actually, you bring me back full circle to your original question, which is how do you structure these deals? And some of the deals included some financing up front, some capital investment that was repaid over time. All of them were long-term contracts. Many of them included technical assistance. We will teach you how to do this. We will share our know-how and technology to teach you how to do this. And most of them were exclusive contracts. So they built just for us, for some kind of period of time. And a lot changes. And I would say when you think about how do you optimize and balance, there's a maturity curve around that. At first it's pretty gross and raw and you're just trying to grow capacity. Then you get a little more mature, you've got the capacity, then you want to start optimizing the cost. You want to start kind of creating strategic, geographic, commercial pathways to business through the local content. So I think there's a little bit of a curve of sophistication that you go up. And coming from nuclear supply chain into wind supply chain, it was pretty interesting to be able to, come from a super developed, mature supply chain into this wild west of a supply chain where, there's no rules. I spent the first 6 months trying to figure out where the procedure was, because I've heard of nuclear. Where the heck is the procedure? And, I think I left when maybe, 7 or 8 years later, I'm not sure I ever saw a procedure, which they probably wouldn't appreciate me sharing, but they're more mature now. Again, up the learning curve. But are
there things though? I mean, so you got to, I always love when people jump around between industries because I feel like there's a lot of learnings to be shared.
Absolutely.
Were there specific things that you learned in wind that you wanted to bring back to nuclear?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yes. When I left nuclear and went to wind, the first year was awful. I tried very hard to come back home. It was just such a culture shock.
And how long were you in wind for?
Oh, wind purely for 5 years.
That's quite a while.
Yeah, well, and then I took a job in corporate where I was still supporting wind for another 3 or 4 years. So almost 10 years. Kind of collectively round it to 10.
Yeah.
And
I find that even more amazing that you started off nuclear, then went
and then
for
came
so
back.
long, and then came back.
Yeah.
Because not only, and I'm going to push again on these learnings, because it's one thing to just go from one industry to a next and kind of see some of the differences. But since you had seen nuclear before, you already had seen some of the problems in mind. And you could kind of be like almost looking for solutions in other industries.
Yeah, I think there's some super value. There's a few of us here at GE that have done this, and we call ourselves the boomerangs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, right.
Cool.
So you leave and you
all
come
you need is a
back
frisbee club and you're set.
Right. So, but yeah, so the first year it was really hard, and I struggled, and all of those places where I struggled were the highlights of. Calling them problems for the nuclear industry maybe isn't quite fair, but it's things that they were hooks and things that held you back from going fast, innovating fast, growing fast. Every bit of feedback I had from my boss for the first 3 years was go faster, Emily. And I think there is something really in the nuclear DNA, probably embedded as a piece of the nuclear safety culture, which is very, very important. But I think there is a tendency to take some of the attributes of a nuclear safety culture, conservative decision making, and let them get so deep in your DNA that you're not just applying them to safety.
Yeah.
You apply them to everything.
That's a real problem.
It is a real problem.
That's a real problem because, I think you just nailed it. Like, that's one of the things that I've noticed too, the time scales. When people tell me, oh, I'm going to deploy a reactor in the next 10 years and they're excited about that time frame, my jaw drops to the ground. I'm like, are you kidding me? I mean, there are many problems with that. Put aside the capital even for a second, but like workplace motivation and like momentum. Like
how can you get your mode?
How can you get the most talented people to work with you if you're saying that you're not going to deliver for 10 years? Most talented people want to deliver something next year.
Yes.
So what do you do?
So now I'm back. So I came back, and when I came back,
what was the story about how you came back?
Oh, how I came back. So again with a mentor.
Yeah.
One of the mentors I had when I was a co-op student, her name was Caroline Rita, and she at the time was kind of a manager here, and she left and went out in big GE and grew up to be a big vice president of everything, and kind of came back to be the CEO of nuclear.
Okay.
And so when we won kind of the nuclear renaissance of kind of, I guess, the 2000, when was that? 2008, 7, 8. We won the North Anna project. We were going to build an ESBWR reactor, and it was a lot of excitement around that. And she called me and said, "Hey, Emily, do I have the job for you? Come back. Bring what you learned about creating capacity and developing supply chains, and come back and do it for our business, because the supply chains that we have in place, they're not robust enough to support a nuclear renaissance. We've got to go faster. We've got to be bigger. We've got to think differently. Bring that back here."
That is kind of a cool role.
Right? So, I was very excited.
Yeah.
I was very excited. It wasn't hard to...
Too bad about the whole renaissance thing.
Yeah, right. But, it's interesting. I came back, and much like the very first year that I left, the first year back, I was pretty miserable. It was pretty hard. I was so frustrated with the speed. I was so frustrated with, there's some things, again, with the culture. It's the shadow side of having a wonderfully strong nuclear safety culture, is that some of those attributes affect things that aren't safety related. And so
this is the most well-articulate positioning of that problem that I've heard yet. The fact that it's a safety culture bleed over to things that don't need safety culture.
Yes. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. This isn't off the cuff for this conversation. I've spent a lot of time thinking
Well, I'm
about
glad
it.
'cause I have too, and I didn't come up with that. But that's good.
But I really want to, and I once I was able to frame it that way, and I can frame it that way when talking to people, it does shift something in their minds. And so I wanted to do that. And because I wanted to make change, I wanted to go fast. And, I had all of this mode, I had all the momentum from working in wind well, we could come back to this too, but there's a whole different mentality and culture in the wind business that is more progressive. And I wanted to bring that in and inspire people here, because what I felt when I got here, it was, if culture had a tangible feeling, the culture of the wind business was light and tingly and effervescent. And the culture in nuclear was like heavy and a real weight,
Molasses.
just a real weight. And when you work in a culture with that kind of weight for a long time, it's hard to have the sparks of innovation, to have the job satisfaction that effervescent feeling can give you. And I wanted to bring that.
Yeah.
I really got very inspired, even as the Renaissance felt, kind of rough or off, that wasn't going to happen. When Dominion decided not to build the North Anna plant, that wasn't going to happen. And so instead of focusing on sourcing, I expanded the role here and took over all the factories. So I had all the manufacturing.
No big deal.
Well, and what I loved about it was the opportunity to influence so many people.
Yeah.
All of a sudden manufacturing, you're touching a ton of people's lives. And I really had this passion and mission to bring some of that effervescence into the workplace. And the resistance I got for the longest time, it was a lot of resistance. But being able to reframe the conversation around, hey, this nuclear safety culture is fantastic. It is a strength of our industry, and we don't need to apply all of that to commercial conversations, to things that aren't safety related. And so a lot of push, a lot of pull, a lot of some progress, but not. There's a long way to go. There's a long way to go. And one of the things I think, my kind of another insight that I was alluding to about wind being more progressive, is a progressive culture, a progressive industry tends to attract and be appealing to a more diverse crowd. And when you have a more diverse workforce, the quality of the ideas is so much better.
Right, we're talking about diversity of thinking here.
Diversity of thought, diversity of cultures, diversity of gender, all types of diversity bring diversity of thought. Diversity of thought brings better solutions faster, and there is data on that. So I think some of that we were missing too. And so that's a challenge that I think as a leadership team, GE-Hitachi really has embraced and has taken on, and has been more strategic in some of the hiring and working on a mix of people that are deep core industry people for forever, and people that are boomerangs, and people that are from external, trying to get the mix a little different, kind of spice it up a little bit, have more constructive debate. And so we're moving towards that.
Tell me about that. Tell me about some of the debates that have come from throwing these diverse groups together. Because I think out of debate comes, that's it, right? Like that's how you, there's so many thoughts that people have locked in their head, and maybe they're not even willing to challenge themselves, or just never even think to challenge them. And it's not like they want to fight so hard for their one position being right, but it takes someone else kind of calling that out. It takes someone else challenging them for the whole conversation to shift. So tell me about some of these debates and maybe some of the things that you see that are changing.
Yeah, I think some of the spaces that we're in today in terms of product growth and strategic growth, like D&D. So we branched out into decommissioning, and we had said, we would never do that.
Mm.
We have branched into pressurized water reactor services,
Cool.
and we said we would never do that. We are, we're working on the versatile test reactor project for the DOE. We said we would never do government services. So, that's 3 examples of stuff we would never have done because it had too much risk. And that took a lot of debate, and it's changing the culture. I think things like that are so visible to the whole workforce that say, we are willing to take risks. We are willing to branch out. Here we go. Watch us, be part of it. That starts to change the culture throughout the organization.
Can I ask something about decommissioning? Because
Yeah.
I'm terrified of decommissioning. I'm terrified that it is going to shape the incentives in the nuclear business towards shutting more plants down. Because as people build businesses around decommissioning it and they see this as a revenue source, what a good company does is they see a revenue source that is working and then they do whatever they can to multiply it. So all of a sudden, I could imagine a universe where nuclear companies are lobbying to have plants shut down so they can access those funds in decommissioning instead of lobbying to keep them running. This scares me.
Man, that's like a dystopian future. That is scary.
I think it's already starting to happen.
Yeah, it's if it is an accelerated path to what I think of as new nuclear, maybe it could be okay. But I also really believe passionately that we have to preserve the existing fleet to meet our decarbonization goals as a planet. And I don't think there is a path to reaching decarbonization goals. And I see a future that is small modular reactors, micro reactors, partnered and holding hands with wind turbines and solar panels. I can see a beautiful effervescent, rainbows and butterflies and over our, carbon-free grid. But to get from here to my utopian view of the future, you have to have the existing fleet providing that carbon-free source. I can't walk a path without that. So I think that's vital. And if your dystopian projection on decommissioning accelerates the conventional fleet shutdown prematurely from being able to reach the utopian integration of new nuclear and other renewable sources, I think that could be trouble.
You definitely danced around it very more eloquently than I could have.
Well, I don't have an answer. Yeah. I mean, you pose a good start question, and
we'll table that one.
I'd be arrogant to say I think I have an answer. I think it's a good fear. I get that.
What else falls under your purview right now?
So I led the manufacturing and sourcing and logistics for the business, and the chief commercial officer role opened up. Mm-hmm. And I think, although my boss might tell this story better than I do, I think they just didn't have the person that they wanted, or they couldn't find the right, the best fit person just didn't show up. Exactly who they were looking for. And so the role was open for a little while. And my boss describes it as he was driving home from work and had an epiphany of, wow, who do I know that has these attributes? And it was attributes of hating to lose, attributes of being able to put deals together, and attributes of being a good communicator and a good leader. He's like, Italy can do that.
Wait, where does the hate to lose come from? I like that. I like the streak. So wait, where does that come from?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think we are, and I've fine-tuned this vision too.
Do you have brothers?
I have 3 children. I have 2 brothers and a sister, so I'm one of 4.
I think the brothers probably helped with the competitive edge.
Could be. It probably didn't hurt anything, but I used to think before I had children that there was nature and nurture, and both were maybe equal. Now that I have children, I think it is 99% nature. We're just filling in on the edges.
Okay.
So that's my new hypothesis, because my children are all so different, and I'm not sure I'm
you're not
filling
a
in on the
helicopter
edges.
parent, is what you're saying.
Oh my gosh, I'm doing the best I can to facilitate them growing up. I'm here as a facilitator. But so I think it's nature. I think my competitive streak is
It's
is
built in you.
nature. It's built in.
Okay. Sorry, that was a distraction.
No,
you were
that's
talking about
okay.
how you transitioned into the role. Your boss had seen all these attributes they wanted, and you fit the bill.
Yeah, but I had no experience in sales. I had no.
It's never stopped you before.
Never stopped me before. So so here we go, back out on that edge of uncomfortable, that edge of I don't know what the hell I'm doing, and isn't that kind of exciting? So I took this role, and I've had it now for about 2 years. And in my day job now is to lead the sales organization, the commercial ops, marketing, all of that kind of stuff for this business, manage customer relationships, take care of our customers. And most recently, I would say in the last 6 to 9 months, I've been trying harder to get out into the industry to be an advocate. You asked earlier about what's changed, what constructive debate has resulted in something different.
Yeah.
And being visible, sitting up in the chair, standing up. I don't think we had the appetite to do that, because if you're going to be visible, if you're going to stand up and have something to say, there's risk associated with that.
Putting your neck out.
You're putting your neck out. And so I think culturally, for a long time, GE's nuclear business would rather have stayed a little below the radar, where it felt safer, where we weren't, we didn't want to stir any feathers. We didn't, no, that's a bad, it's a mixed metaphor, but anyway, you know what I mean, right? So, we didn't want to,
ruffle any feathers.
That. Ruffle feathers, stir the pot.
Stir.
Yeah, mixed metaphor. So at least it wasn't an acronym. So we had a lot of debate about that.
Yeah.
Do we want to be leaders? And the answer after some debate was yes.
Okay, where do these debates happen? This is amongst the leadership?
Mm-hmm.
And then is this, when you say that there's debate, is this like literally in a boardroom setting and you have like a scheduled time to like hash out an issue? Or is this like you're calling up, John at night and saying, you know what, I thought about something you said today and I think that we should do that. Like how far, like what does a debate look like at the senior most leadership level of a giant corporation?
For us, the way it works is we started out and we team corporations, you have staff meetings. You get together and you have a staff meeting.
Unfortunately.
So we renamed our staff meeting, and it was, instead of a staff meeting, we were going to call it Listen, Engage, Align, and Decide. LEAD. So we now have lead meetings because we love acronyms too. And so we carved out time in formerly known as the staff meeting. And we said, attendance is mandatory. If you can't make it, you can't send an actor. You have to be there so that we could protect the intimacy and trust of the group, because it took some trust building. And we carved out time and said, we're going to debate these spicy topics.
How many people show up to these meetings?
Maybe 10 to 15.
Okay, so it's pretty intimate.
This is an intimate session. And so we started doing that, and we had, I'll say it was against our cultural indoctrination. It was tough.
Yeah.
Do you
remember any stories of it getting heated and really having to work through some hard issues?
Yeah, yes. And part of how we decided to work through it was we kept this format, but then we also added some off-site meetings to do the same thing where we spent a whole day.
Awesome.
And, get out of the boardroom and, put on your jeans. Of course, I do have jeans in the boardroom today, but, wear your flip-flops, let's go, let's sit around. We created,
I hear the beaches here are wonderful.
The beaches here are wonderful. And get out of engage our brains in a different way. Put yourself in a situation where it helps you to think differently. So we did that, and now we do that once a quarter. So, a few times a year, here's our topics, here's the things we're going to debate, and we go off-site and get together, and it's that same, 10 to 15, that group of people, and we talk about them. And we're debating now, things like, what is our decommissioning strategy? How do we want to play in it? What is our strategy with regards to the PWR market? What do we want to do in government services? How much more are we willing to do? Who are we? What is our brand? And is there a place that we could go in the nuclear space that doesn't align with our brand. And so we have some good strategic debates.
Yeah, that's very wide-ranging.
It is.
All those topics you just gave. That's amazing that you guys are actually doing that, because I feel like so many companies just grow stale and die, and you're not doing that. You are like exploring very interesting questions there.
We are. I'm proud of that, and I love being part of this team. I think one thing that wind and nuclear really have in common is both are filled with true believers.
Yes.
Great
engineers,
true believers, and both groups have that, and nuclear has it in spades. And I think the leadership team of GE-Hitachi is converging around being true believers, and true believers not in necessarily the past, but true believers in what the future for nuclear can be, and how do we play? How do we contribute? How do we grow as a business, but also grow the industry? And the vision and the willingness to be bold, it's changed. And I think that fundamentally came from some of this structured time for debate.
That's awesome.
I mean, think about how odd it is really to have a debate on whether or not you're going to be bold. Only in the nuclear industry.
Someone's got to make up a T-shirt only in the nuclear industry, like in the yearbooks or
top
something.
10, senior superlatives, things about the nuclear.
Okay, so when you make these decisions, do you have to? What's the relationship between GE-Hitachi and Big GE? When you make a strategic decision, like, are we going to add a new business line? Do you have to run it up to Big GE also, or is there a certain amount of autonomy?
Yes, I guess there is a certain amount of autonomy, but in any decision that would affect the enterprise risk of Big GE, it runs up the
and
chain.
What kind of things would affect enterprise risk?
Getting into decommissioning could potentially affect enterprise risk. Anything that would increase our liability. Getting into government services actually has been one where there's some enterprise risk to that. Working for the government has a lot of unique restrictions and criteria, and if you don't do it well, you can find yourself kind of crosswise. And so things like that, I guess, are some examples.
And then how does the process go? So let's say that there is some risk of crossover into the big organization. Do you kind of come together on it internally here, and then how does it get decided, and how does the decision come back down, and how does that whole process?
I don't know. You almost just described it. I feel like you might have a job in enterprise risk management.
Please,
we have.
keep me out of it. No way.
No, but really, the way you describe it, we come to a consensus here. We develop a recommendation. We have an enterprise risk management process that we run through here, where we gather experts in different functions in different areas, and we take a look at and ask why and ask questions. And there's a formal process decision tree we go through to kind of pull out hidden risks. I mean, let's face it, the nuclear industry knows how to evaluate risk. I mean, if we are
too much, maybe a little bit too much.
Well, and I tell you, so this is a great example of where what we were talking about, that bleed over can happen, right? Because you can get mired down in a risk analysis to the extent where you might as well just stay home. It is too risky to come to work. You have to get in a car and drive. There might be some weather and lightning could strike. I mean, you can get really mired down. So I think that's just a place where you have to also be conscious of everything has some risk. Let's vet it. But anyway, so there's a process where you vet the risk, and there's a whole council around it. You come to a consensus. You present it up the chain to GE, which also has an enterprise risk management function and assessment, and then they come back with, here's your answer. And you asked about the autonomy. I see us having more autonomy than we've had in the past. Some of that, I think, is GE's own leadership changes and kind of a different view of our current chairman and his view that we have a bunch of small businesses that need to be able to run like small businesses, eliminated a lot of the GE overhead and corporate structure, and has given more power and more accountability to each of the individual businesses. So for us, that's been really empowering. Yeah, I hate to overuse the word, but it is because we've always been tied to the gas turbine business.
Yeah.
And so if you just think about scale, they're just a massive behemoth, and we're much smaller. We kind of would get lost in the rounding sometimes on things like capital allocation, and now we're not. So I think we've got more, that sense of empowerment is bleeding through in a good way to people walking around with their heads a little higher, a little more confident, a little more willing to take a risk because you don't think you're going to be shut down. So yeah, I think that's been that a little bit more autonomy has been good.
So fuel services, what else falls under the purview of sales? What else are you guys selling?
Let's see, fuels, services, parts, kind of anything you want. Let me be a good salesperson.
And does this tie into new plants as well? What's the relationship between sales of the existing lines and new power plants altogether?
Yeah, so we have a loose but connected partnership. So there is a commercial leader for the new plants business that is loosely connected with my organization. There's right now at the point of maturity the new plants business is such a different animal versus the traditional markets. So I won't say we never cross, but there's not as much crossing.
But there are potential driver of customers for you, perhaps.
There are, and
And is there a way to think about it like that? Is there a way to think about the whole what is it, like the toothbrush head model, where you get the toothbrush out there, but then you sell them the toothbrush heads forever? Is there a way to think about it from your part of the organization? Hey, maybe we'd even be able we'd be willing to help subsidize the cost of new plants so we can sell fuel to them for the next 100 years. Does that conversation come up at all?
I think we've talked about it conceptually, but we've worked very hard and are working hard in the design phase to make sure that the economics of the reactor are such that it can have a winning value proposition for us and a buyer without kind of counting on making it a loss leader. We don't want it to be a loss leader.
Yeah.
There's a business philosophy that says that's a reasonable way to go to market, but that's not really how we're approaching new plants. What is really encouraging is that some of our existing fleet customers are now much more seriously talking about, making some investments. Dominion is one where they're investing in our new plant technology as an investor, and that's a creative new structure and way to accelerate getting innovation faster and bringing it to market.
And what about just in terms of coming back to your supply chain roots? Do the new plant people come to you and say, hey, we're thinking about a design here. Can you even get us the fuel for this? And how does that work? And do they come to you with supply chain risk problems and say, are you going to be our fuel supplier?
Yeah. I think we are fuel and reactor services and plant mods. I mean, that's who we are.
Right. So you're not even worried.
We're
about
not.
that.
I mean,
that's
right. That's who we are. Kind of going back to that conversation about our brand and what defines us and who are we in this industry. We are those things, and we also make plants, or we design plants. Excuse me, we design plants. We don't make them, but so yeah, I think it's actually a pretty interesting strategic advantage, like with the BWRX 300, to be able to design knowing that you have a mature supply chain already established.
Definitely.
Without a doubt. Being able to kind of incorporate into the design, hey, we have this fuel factory. Let's make it so we can incorporate what we already have. That takes cost out. That speeds things up. All good things.
You mentioned earlier that I want to come back to it, advocacy and going out into the community. Mm-hmm. What are some of your efforts there? How do you take that forward? How do you become a voice for the nuclear industry to the rest of the world?
So what I've done, I'll tell you what I've done thus far, and I'll tell you what I want to do.
Yeah.
Okay. So thus far, I speak at industry conferences. I'm very involved with women in nuclear events. I speak on panels. I've done keynote speaking there. There's been, I spoke at World Nuclear Association. I don't have to get back. I've done a lot of industry speaking. So that's a way that's visible. But that has now become too comfortable. So now I'm interested in, finding that edge, meeting it, and taking it a little further. I want to talk to people that aren't true believers.
Yeah, go to some climate change conferences.
I want to go to some climate change. I want to be on a panel at a climate change conference.
How are you going to do that? How
are
are you going to get those panel spots?
Well, working on it.
Okay.
I'm working on it. So I
I'm pushing you.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what I've started. Okay. A couple of weeks ago, I did the Atomic Wings panel that DOE puts on for the House, and that was a little spicier than normal. I mean, we got a lot of questions from the staffers about, and the topic was nuclear energy and wind partnering for a carbon-free electric grid.
Oh, interesting.
Could you pick a topic I could be more passionate about? Right. So it felt meant to be as a way for me to kind of move into that sort of space. And so it was tough though. I mean, they asked tough questions. That was not a room of true believers.
What did they ask? What did they push back on nuclear about? I mean, they're the ones that can't control when they turn on and off.
The toughest, some were kind of predictable, but the one question was, hey, I hear you say it's safe. I hear you say you've got a safety culture and good designs, but what about 3 Mile Island? What about Chernobyl? What about Fukushima? How do you guarantee that won't happen again? And that's actually the woman that answered it, I thought answered it very well, but it
doesn't convince them. It doesn't convince them because the only way to answer that question is to not answer that question. And that's what the nuclear industry, they fall into the trap every single time, the defensiveness trap. People ask about safety and they launch in with a technical explanation about how it's safe. And that scares people more. They don't realize it's counterintuitive.
The technical it sounds scarier than the reality.
Even acknowledging it, the only way that you, and this sounds terrible because this is not how we're raised to treat people, but the only way that you can dismiss concerns about safety is by dismissing them. Is by making someone feel like it is not a problem. And the way that you do that is with confidence.
Yeah.
When you get into an explanation, whether it's technical or not technical, you're showing defensiveness, and that is the opposite of confidence. So it's a real struggle that this industry has had to deal with the safety issue because it is not nice to not treat someone's question with the full weight of what it deserves. But on the other hand, it makes things worse.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a spiral down. The other way that it gets answered, I think, is kind of equally tough, which is, compare us. Look how bad other industries are.
Right.
And
once
then
again,
that's
defensive.
That's defensive. Right? That's tough. So yeah, I think the some other I didn't take that one. So there were 2 other panelists that were more technical than I was, and I think they kind of attacked it. One thing they said though that did kind of tickle me in the spirit of tackling it a different way. One lady referred to there is a children's book called Everybody Poops.
Okay.
And so that's a little bit. She said, every industry, every power generation technology has a waste, has an issue, has something about it that it could create a threat. And but that's still, you fall into that relativity trap. It lightened the mood, made it seem less scary, maybe. I don't know, but so that was a trap. Not trap. That was a tough one, and then unexpected. And then there were some tougher ones about cost and about the whole idea of our subsidies and why should we pay for that. I also went to another one was I went to the Nuclear Power's Pennsylvania rally and spoke there, and I think there I got a couple of good spicy tough questions around why should taxpayers subsidize nuclear with these zero emission credits. And so I've been trying to put myself out there more, kind of get in that line of fire, be bold.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll see how that continues to unfold, but it's something that is giving me a lot of energy right now, and I feel like it is helping. I want to connect the dots for other people that, at the intersection of different technologies, at the intersection of technologies that can do amazing things that can also do good. I think nuclear is one of them. And so for me, I was an environmentalist as a kid. It's funny, I probably shouldn't admit it, but I was a card-carrying member of Greenpeace. I know, right? But I was. That also is who I am.
Yeah.
So I am that person, and I'm an advocate for nuclear. And I think that never in my life, as much as in the last couple of years with what's changing in GE in terms of our attitude towards being bold and bullish in a future for nuclear that isn't hinging on, a renaissance. It's hinging on real science and the needs of humanity. Right, so that intersection that nuclear fits, where it's good science and it's intersecting with needs of humanity and decarbonization, it's so motivating and inspiring to be at that intersection, and it's this convergence of things that wanting to do good, and also do good at my job, So there's a real convergence now that what we're doing, it has such a sense of purpose and such a sense of power for helping the planet and helping the world and helping humanity. And how do you not get excited about that? And in this role as the commercial leader, I get to get paid for. It's part of my day job is getting to go out and be that advocate and talk about that convergence and talk about those intersections. And that's just wonderful. It's really a wonderful opportunity, and I wouldn't have thought I'd be as excited about my job every day as I am right now. And I think a lot of it has to do with kind of where we are and what we're willing to do in terms of risk and being bold.
Emily Martin can end on a better note than that. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much.
Very.